This 24-200 has been my main telephoto lens for my landscape photography for the past 6 months. And now, after a long while using it, I'm ready to give my full review. So let's jump right in and talk about it. What's up, y'all? It's Project Photography back in the video, and today, as a lot of you guys may know, this 24-200 has been my main telephoto lens for my landscape photography. I've used it alongside my 14-30 as my wide-angle lens, and this has been used for telephoto photos to isolate certain subject matter and whatnot. The 24-200 range is also extremely versatile. I mean, having the 24-70 range in here along with the telephoto range has been quite interesting and an experience I really want to dive into this video. This replaces my Nikon Z6 plus my 52-50. But, you know, the Z6 plus the 52-50 had an effective focal length at the long end of 375, where this only has 200mm on the long end. So these are some interesting points that I really want to dive in and talk about in my full review for landscape photographers. But before we jump into the actual video, let's go over what the actual video is going to be talking about. And first of all, we're going to be talking about ergonomics to start off. We're talking about focal length after. Then we're talking about the aperture, and image quality, and then we're going to finish with the conclusion. So with that being said, let's jump right into the ergonomics of this lens. First of all, this is a bit of a plasticky lens. The base of the lens is plastic, unlike lenses like the 14-30, and it is plastic all the way through. But luckily we do have a metal mount, which does add a lot of, you know, stability, a lot of feel to the lens. One thing I really like about this lens is actually how well balanced it is. When I'm actually shooting with it, I can add an L bracket, which is absolutely massive. And when I'm zooming out to the 24-200 range, I don't feel like there's an imbalance when I'm actually using the lens. Even though this lens is plastic, I feel like it's well constructed, it's well built. I don't feel like it's gonna break on me anytime soon, unlike something like the 50-250, which, you know, had issues with the build construction and whatnot. This is a very solid lens overall. So even though it is fully plastic, it is not something I would necessarily worry about. Balancing it with the Nikon Z6 is actually very nice. You know, when I've used lenses like the 70-300, it's obviously an adaptive lens, but that lens did not necessarily balance the best with something like the Nikon Z6. And I think because this is a native lens and it's very much a small lens, like look how tiny that thing is. It's not a very big lens at all. It makes it really easy to use with the Nikon Z6. Like I said before, using L brackets is absolutely huge with this, because what I'm able to do is put it into horizontal orientation and then switch it to vertical when I need be. And when I'm shooting a lot of telephoto work, I am using vertical a lot of the time. And also having that L bracket, being able to use it with a lens like this, allows me to get panoramas and whatnot, which is absolutely huge. You know, that's something I really love doing with my telephoto lenses, and it's really nice to see that it's really something that's very easy to use with this lens. Another major part why I actually picked up this lens is because it's extremely lightweight. It doesn't weigh very much, and it is very small, very light, very compact, and that makes it really easy to travel around as a landscape photographer. We don't want to be carrying too much weight when we're actually out there hiking, going on trips, and so on. We want something that's very minimalistic, takes up very little space in the bag, and this lens does just that. I don't feel like I'm carrying this huge bulky thing around. Like for example, if I were using something like a 70-200, that's a big bulky lens, and this definitely cuts down a lot of the weight, a lot of the size that is very necessary when actually traveling. Another big part I like about this lens is it actually has a locking mechanism here. Because we have a longer focal range of 24-200, it's really necessary to have it in there, so it's not moving around the bag and whatnot when I'm actually traveling with it. I can feel secure that it's not gonna, you know, zoom out to 200 or something just happens with the lens. That's really what we want to avoid at all costs. Top of it, we have a 67mm filter thread, which I think is absolutely huge because, you know, I use actually a 67-82mm step-up ring for this lens, so I'm able to put my 82mm filters on it. Overall, I actually really enjoy using this lens ergonomically. You know, of course, we have the great balance, we have the great feels of the lens, and when it comes to my setup and being an addition to my bag, the ergonomics of this thing actually feels very seamless, very similar to using something like a 14-30. So ergonomically, this lens is extremely good for landscape photographers. I think it'll survive the elements, and I don't think you'll have any issues when you're actually using the lens, ergonomically speaking. I do wish the bottom was metal, but of course that would add a little bit more to the weight. I think it's so well constructed that it's really not a big issue. But with that being said, let's talk about the main reason why I would actually pick up a lens like this for my landscape photography, and it is the focal length. First of all, the biggest question I had when moving to something like a 24-200 full frame on a Nikon Z6 compared to a Nikon Z50 plus a 52-50 was whether that 200mm would be enough for me and my landscape photography. Because that is quite a big jump. You know, 250 on a crop sensor body is essentially a 375mm focal length. And comparing that to 200mm, you're shaving off 175mm on the long end. And as landscape photography, you think that's really important. But for me and what I found with my own landscape photography and how I shoot, I have not actually missed that extra, bit of range. 200mm is more than enough for me. And on my last shoot, I didn't even go past like 135. And that's honestly very much a-okay. I did not feel like I needed to have that extra bit of focal length, and that was my main concern when buying a lens like this. Was 200mm in focal length going to be enough? And I can for sure say without a doubt that it very much is. I'm really happy with actually this focal range. One thing that actually really surprised me about buying this lens is that I did not really think I was going to be using the 24-70 range all that much. I really felt like it was just a nice addition to have to the lens, but I actually used it quite a bit. It's really useful, especially for panoramas, because when I'm doing panoramas, we're shooting from top to bottom, side to side. Maybe not necessarily a 135 or 105 focal length would fit that. Something like a 60mm or 50mm focal length might fit that better. And that's what I've actually found out a lot about this lens. The 24-200 range is actually an incredible focal length, and I really enjoyed using it a lot when it came to my landscape photography. I used the entire range. There wasn't a single focal length where I was like, yeah, I don't really need to use that, besides probably closer to the wider end, because if I'm shooting wide with this lens, I might as well just use something like a 14-30. Like, focally speaking, for the Nikon Z system, this is the best lens for landscape photographers when it comes to the telephoto side of things. I mean, 24-200 is absolutely incredible. I've said a long time that, you probably should not be using a 24-70 lens for landscape photography. I just don't find that focal range really useful when you have something like a 14-30 plus a 70-200-300. But I've actually used it a lot, but I still don't think you should probably get a dedicated 24-70. But that does not mean that 24-70 range isn't useful, because I definitely use it quite a bit. I was just really surprised when it came to that. That's something I was not really expecting, but I'm really glad a lens like this is here. And I think that reason almost by itself would kind of eliminate me needing to get something like a 70-300 if they ever came out with a lens like that, because there's a 24-70 range and a 70-200 range in one lens is so incredibly useful. And of course, the goal of a 24-200, more of a telephoto lens is to isolate certain subject matters in the actual landscape. And this lens definitely does that. We still have that 70-200 range, but now having the 24-70 range adds an incredible amount of versatility. I can get those different perspectives. I can get those different looks. I can make sure that my landscapes are not just one-noted all the time, just going from strictly telephoto to strictly wide angle. I feel like I'm able to get an extremely, versatile set of images that I feel like would fit the landscape, because you never know what you're going to get when you're actually out there shooting landscape photography. You have to be prepared for pretty much everything, and I think having that extra 24-70 range is actually incredibly useful. So versatility is a name of the game when it comes to this lens. It doesn't have the 300mm, but I don't feel like I miss it at all. 200mm is just fine. So having that 200mm along it is perfectly good. So with that being said, let's talk about aperture on this lens, because that was something that I was really in question about when picking up a lens like this. I wasn't necessarily like, oh yeah, like I don't like the aperture range, but it is something that had a little bit of concern to me. And that's kind of where I feel like this lens falls a bit short. It's a f4 to a 6.3, and it does go to f6 pretty quickly when it comes to actually zooming into the lens. And it's not a huge issue for landscape photography, mainly because we're shooting at f8 majority of the time. But when it comes to other sorts of photography, that's where we kind of find issues. When it comes to other photography with this lens, not just landscape photography, we're not able to get as much depth in the images as we like. For example, for portraiture, this probably isn't the best lens out there for that, because 6.3 at 200mm is not necessarily something you want to be shooting at all the time. Ideally, you would of course want an f2.8, but even something like a 5.6 would work. I feel like f6.3 is just pretty dark, and it's not really the best option when it comes to actually shooting other things. Of course, you can still get depth in images, if you shoot close enough to it, but that's only in certain circumstances, certain subject matters that would allow you to do that. But with that being said, of course, in a pinch, it does work. I was able to get some pretty incredible portraiture out of this lens. I was shooting my grad photos with it, and I think the photos came out just fine. Of course, depth, is still an issue, but that's something you can kind of work around with, working on contrast and all those other sorts of things. I think the aperture actually limits it in terms of, being a jack of all trades lens, because if it was something like a f3.5 to a 5.6, that makes this lens a lot more usable for a lot more things. But sadly, just having that f4 to 6.3 does hinder it a little bit. That's pretty much the only knock I have on this lens. But overall, when it comes to strictly landscape photography, it's not really an issue. Still would have loved to have that f5.6 because sometimes I do shoot wide open when I'm shooting panoramas, because you don't necessarily want to be shooting at f8 all the time if it's too dark, because then you have shutter speed issues, and with panoramas that is actually something you have to worry about. So with that being said, let's jump right into image quality. And this is also another question I had about this lens, because when you have something like a 24-200 range, you're going to have issues with image quality, traditionally speaking, with the f mount, right? We had 28-300s that had sharpness issues, that had contrast issues. You know, when you have a bunch of glass in there, which these lenses normally do, you're gonna have issues like that, because having the light go through all those pieces of glass definitely hinders the final result when it comes to image quality. With this lens, I don't have any of those issues. This lens is extremely sharp. And that's kind of the theme that we've seen with the Nikon Z mount. All the lenses are extremely sharp corner to corner, just great micro contrast. And this lens definitely follows suit with that. The ton of glass in it does not really bode much of an issue for me. And it comes out with incredible images at f8 in particular. In terms of the overall feels of the image, I actually very much like how these images feel. They're very nice, very contrasty. The colors definitely pop. And the images just come out really well out of this lens. And even though it's not an S-line lens, and I feel like that moniker does not necessarily matter all too much, but images are perfectly fine on this lens. I really enjoy them a lot, and I feel like you're really able to create some amazing landscape photography, especially this paired with a Nikon Z6 is probably one of the best telephoto combos you're going to get for landscape photography in particular when it comes to all those sorts of things. So now let's jump into the conclusion, what my final say is about this lens. This is absolutely a must-have for landscape photographers. If you're going to be picking up a telephoto lens, this is the one to get. Don't get yourself a 70-200 because you're going to have weight issues. Don't get yourself a Nikon Z50 with a 50-250. It's just not full frame. And this covers all the bases extremely well. Having that 24-200 range is extremely versatile focal range that I actually really love using. The 24-70 range was something that I use a lot more than I thought I did. Having a 200mm on the long end was not an issue when it came to actually shooting the landscape photography. I thought it was going to be my initial first impressions of it, but it's not. I don't need a 300mm. 200mm is just fine. We're talking about ergonomics being extremely good, even though it has a little bit of plastic. It's lightweight. It's compact. I don't really know what else you need in a lens like that. It's really good for landscape photography. This paired with something like a 14-30 or a 14-24 would be absolutely stunning for pretty much every landscape photography scenario that you can throw at it. And really, I think what this lens does extremely well, it helps capture all the perspectives that you want in a landscape that's possible. You know, the 24-200 range, like I said, is extremely versatile. If you want to get those slightly wider panoramas shooting at 50mm going up and down the actual image, this lens would be able to do just that. If you want to get those slightly fielded views, you can do that. You can zoom in all the way to 200 and get those nice isolated, subject matters that telephoto lenses are traditionally used for. This isn't just a telephoto lens anymore. It's a jack of all trades lens. It's a perspective lens that I feel like really does a lot for landscape photographers. We have our wide angles. That is an absolute staple in the bag. But now this expands that a little, right? We're not just seeking out telephoto images. We can now capture a whole slew of them, and it will still do the telephoto images just fine. For me personally, even if a lightweight telephoto lens like a 70-300 came out, I don't think I would switch over from this because this is so small, so ergonomic, so lightweight, nice handling, great use with L brackets. I mean, this really has everything you need in a great secondary telephoto lens for landscape photography. But for other types of photography, it's good, but you have to be mindful of the aperture in particular. The focal range is great, no one's denying that, but going from f4 to 6.3 really does, I feel like, hinder it when it comes to actually separation of the background and adding that depth to images. For example, this would probably not be the best lens for a portraiture. And of course, this isn't meant for portraiture. It's meant for it to be kind of a jack of all trades, but you have to be cognizant of that when you're picking up a lens like this. Overall, it's super fun going from wide angle to 200mm when actually shooting with this lens. I think it's it's such an interesting focal length to go, and you get so many different perspectives. It's such a great lens. This is overall an extremely fantastic lens that I definitely would not be giving up anytime soon, even if they came out with a 70-300 for landscape photographers. So if you have a landscape photography kit, if you're a Nikon Z shooter, if you have already a 14-30, a wide angle lens for your landscape photography, and you need a telephoto lens, this is the one to get. This is an absolute must-have Not just because it's a telephoto lens, but because it captures a bunch of different perspectives that us landscape photographers love to capture. So let me know what you guys think about this lens. What telephoto lens are you currently using for your Nikon Z6 system? Let me know down in the comment section down below. Anyways, guys, that is it for this video. Pick up this lens if you have a chance. Check it out in the description bar down below. And if you had a chance yet, please check out my website. I have all my work up there. I have prints for sale and so on. So thank you guys so much for experiencing the world with me today. Please rate, comment, subscribe, and I will catch you guys in the next one.